on the afternoon of the 7th of September 1933. A tragedy so shocking rocked the town of Nelson here in the northwest of England. This, my friends, is the sad and unsolved tragic death of a young boy by the name of Robert James Hockenhull. Where we are today is the former site of what was known as Bradley Mill. And as you can see, apart from this huge chimney in front of us, there's nothing else remaining here. But it's here where today's story tragically took place, like I said, on the 7th of September 1933. And the story revolves around a 6-year-old boy by the name of Robert James Hockenhull. Now Robert, he was an adventurous young boy from all accounts, but he was also one that was very obedient to his family, his friends, his colleagues, and he was well liked by his peers at nearby Bradley School, which is just over there. So very close to where this tragedy unfolded. Now on the day of the tragedy that we're about to get into, Robert had left school just before lunchtime, and he made his way over to exactly where we are stood now, just in this direction. And somewhere along here, and I think it was just over there, we're going to go to that site shortly, but it was over there where, from all accounts, there was an old discarded motor vehicle. And there are where boys used to play, they used to adventure, they used to sit in it and pretend they were driving it. And it wasn't uncommon for boys to be shooed away by workers at the time, because they were always congregating, like I said, on this disused motor vehicle. Now on the afternoon of the disappearance of young Robert, like I said, he came down to this location and he was seen playing here with another boy. But we need to go a bit further on into the day before we can get into too much about the disappearance of Robert. And what usually happened was, when young Robert had left Bradley School, he used to make his way over towards where his father worked, where James worked. And he used to see him and talk to him. And his father would obviously spend a little bit of time with Robert, one would presume, throughout James's own lunchtime at the mill he worked at. But on this day in particular, Robert didn't go and visit his father James. Instead he came here with another boy by the name of Clarence. Now when James finished work and made his way home and there was no sign of his son Robert, James came out to look for him. And it was during his initial, obviously, investigations, if you will, when he were out looking, he was speaking to local residents, he was knocking on doors, he was speaking to other young boys, asking if they'd seen his son, Robert. Now, it was then he came across a boy called Leslie Wilkinson, and it was young Leslie who himself had said and had told James that he had seen young Robert down here with the other boy, Clarence. Now, James himself made his way to Bradley School, where this school was still open. And he soon caught up with Clarence, and Clarence admitted, he would admit, that he was indeed down here with Robert that day. So obviously panicking, James, he didn't really know what else to do other than contact the local authorities. So a search party was quickly instigated in and around these neck of the woods. Now one constable called PC Winter, he came down to this area known as the Beck, or the Goit as it was known as back in 1933. And the Goit, or the Beck, there's a stream, and I think it's called the Wolverden stream, and I'll put the name down below. But there's a stream that runs right through here and further on into the distances further over there. But it was at this precise spot here, unfortunately, the body of Robert would soon come floating to the surface. PC Winter, along with another constable, quickly made their way down to this area, and this was known as the Beck or the Goyt, and this is the Wolverden stream. And like I said, if I've got that name wrong, I will put it down below. But it was here where the body of poor Robert would ultimately be discovered. And after several minutes of dragging this area with grappling hooks, his body came to the surface. Now, at this moment in time, it actually doesn't look too deep, but you can see the embankments, just how tall they are and how steep they are. And at the time, it was a lot worse. It was a lot wetter, a lot more difficult to get up if one should fall down. Now, there were signs, there were scrape marks on the side of this incline, which would assume, or people would assume, that Robert himself had tried to climb out of the stream. Unsuccessfully, obviously failed. Now, when his body was pulled from this stream, it was noticeable that he had suffered from severe burning. This part of the stream, and just a bit further over there, this part of the stream, the water was boiling hot. Now, the reason why this section of water was boiling hot is because the mill, or the mills that once stood just here and all around us, they were pumping excess water into the stream here. So the hot water coming from the mills was being fed directly into the stream below. So it was really hot, it was boiling hot. Now, Robert's body had suffered from severe burning all over. His left ear was badly discoloured. It was thought at the time his death would have been quite rapid, simply because of the heat of the water. But it was what was to come at the coroner's inquest that would become all the more baffling. Now, we do have an old black and white photograph, an aerial photograph, showing where Bradley Mill once stood. And we do know that Bradley Mill, parts of it was sold off to what would become known as Riverside Mill. So the newspaper articles at the time would state that Robert's body would be found alongside Riverside Mill. It took a little bit of research, but we did ultimately find out that Riverside Mill and Bradley Mill were both one of the same, if that makes sense. Now, the photograph it shows, you will see this Goyt, this area, and I'll put an arrow over to show you exactly where we are in that old photograph. Now, somewhere in between the two mills would have been that old abandoned or disused motor vehicle. Now, me and Vicky's been talking about this motor vehicle because it does prove an important feature. Now, I kind of think it probably would have been maybe an old lorry, old wagon that used to transport the cotton, the fabrics to and from, obviously, here to other businesses, or it could have been the raw materials it was used to carry. Nevertheless, I believe it probably would have been a wagon or a lorry. Could have been a motor vehicle, as in a car, like Vicky said, but I'm thinking 30s, 1930s, a mill that used to be here, more likely a wagon of sorts. Now, this wagon, and it would be brought up at the inquest, why was it just left here, not got removed, not got rid of, and why was it easily accessible for young boys to come down and play on it? Why wasn't it cordoned off? Why wasn't the mill itself cordoned off to stop young boys coming down and adventuring in these areas? All these questions will be put to the owners of the mills by coroner Mr. Rowland. Whilst we were mentioning young Robert and scratch marks in the embankments, it must have been on this side, if it was on this side of the stream, which I think it is, because as you can see, it is just all vegetation. That side is a built-up wall, and it is roughly 7 feet tall. Now, the newspaper articles at the time state clearly that there was a 7-foot drop into the boiling water. Now, if something tragically happened, and obviously it did, then you may be asking yourselves, why weren't people alerted here at the mill? Now, from all accounts, the noise of the river running through here at the time was quite substantial. So those inside the mills who were operating machinery, along with the machinery noise, they would not have heard anybody outside here screaming for help. Also, because of the steam rising from this section on the mill windows, nobody could actually see out, so nobody would have noticed the boys playing here, and obviously what happened here for Robert to lose his life. Now we are going to leave this area shortly and head towards Nelson Cemetery, which is only a couple of minutes in a different direction, but we know for a fact that young Robert was interred in the grounds of Nelson Cemetery shortly after his body had been discovered. We also know that 2 other people are interred in the same plot, so I'm thinking it's perhaps his mother and father. We know from records Robert was an only child, so this is why I'm kind of thinking maybe when his mother and father eventually passed over, they were buried in the same plot, but we won't know that for sure until we get to Nelson Cemetery and hopefully find his final resting place. Now the cemetery itself we've never been to, but I was looking on Google Maps just the other night just to see where it is and get our bearings, and the place does look a big place to visit, so it might be like a needle in a haystack. Fingers crossed though, we will locate young Robert. So where we stood right now potentially could be where the motor vehicle used to be, and it would kind of make sense because of the drop just down the side, and like I said, the other side, it is a wall, a 7-foot high wall. So like I said, where those scratch marks on the embankment used to be, this could well be of where the vehicle itself used to reside. But as you can see, like I said before, it's just rubble now. And it's a shame that this is another huge old mill that is no longer here. But they have kept this chimney. And it's a magnificent structure as far as chimneys go. I also believe that they are trying to, or they have got planning permission to build many houses along here. And that was a story that I read 4 or 5 years ago, and as you can see, nothing really has transpired from that just yet. As you can see here at Nelson Cemetery, it is a big place, and we don't have the actual headstone number of where Robert and the 2 other persons are interred, and it's making life really difficult. We have tried looking on all websites and other sources that we always use for stories such as this, but for some reason we can't find any record. And when I say record, I'm talking about the actual headstone number of where these 3 interments are. We know he is buried here in this cemetery. The newspaper articles at the time clearly say interred at Nelson Cemetery, so we know for a fact he's here. We've also found a record which points us to this cemetery, which says there are 2 other interments. So we know we are indeed in the right location, but we can't narrow down, like I said, which plot or which area of this cemetery they are indeed buried. We just don't have a headstone number, and as you can see here, sporadically there are, I won't say empty plots, but certainly the headstones are missing, which we do find quite a lot, and I've mentioned it a few times over the last couple of years when doing these kind of stories. You will find spaces where headstones used to be but are no longer. At the inquest into the death of young Robert, the coroner, after speaking to Leslie Wilkinson, and he felt that Leslie told the truth, he spoke well, he was well mannered, he gave the evidence as should be given, and he was more than happy with Leslie's testimony. But when it came to Clarence himself, he quickly picked up that Clarence was withholding something. He was withholding what went on, what happened on that tragic afternoon. He would soon start to pick at Clarence's witness testimony and to his version of events, and he would find flaws, he would find holes in it. For instance, he would ask Clarence why he told the police officers that he'd went to the Cooperative Society for his dinner, when the truth was he didn't. He would also ask Clarence why then he changed it and said he went home for his dinner, which he didn't. So he lied on 2 occasions. And the judge, or the coroner, he knew Clarence was hiding the truth. But what was that truth? And would Clarence actually confess to what happened that afternoon? When pressed upon why he was lying and why did he tell the police that Clarence himself had made his way to the Cooperative Society for lunch when he didn't, he told the coroner that he was simply frightened. So the coroner asked him, well, what are you frightened of? Just tell the truth. And Clarence, he just come out with things like, please sir, I was just frightened. So the coroner, he started to push him a bit more. Look boy, why are you frightened? Tell us what happened. Please sir, nothing. So obviously the coroner at this point was becoming extremely frustrated by Clarence's testimony, and with Clarence lying in the courts under oath, but because he was such a young boy, the coroner himself couldn't really do much more. He couldn't force it out of Clarence. And this came as a bit of a bitter pill to swallow for the parents of young Robert Hockenhull. And as daft as it sounds and as strange as it sounds, the coroner at the end, he could only record an open verdict on young Robert's death. He couldn't force the truth out of Clarence. Now, the other strange thing about all this is, Clarence did actually say in court and to police officers that he had left young Roberts with 2 other young boys. But when the police did their investigations, they went door to door, they went looking for witnesses, they couldn't find any trace, anything of these other 2 boys. So the courts, the jury, they would assume that Clarence was making all this up, he was lying, there were no other boys there, and something tragic happened to young Robert, and Clarence was the only person who could actually come forward and tell the truth, tell what happened that afternoon. Obviously with the judge not getting anywhere with Clarence, and Clarence seemed to be like seizing up inside and reluctant to talk. The judge himself would, like I said, he'd just place an open verdict on Robert's death, much to the annoyance of, obviously, the parents. He would also say that it was more than likely that Robert himself had just simply slipped into the stream onto where the boiling water was, and he struggled to get out, and obviously Clarence panicked and he fled the scene. He couldn't do anything to help young Robert. But it's a tragic story, and it's one that, like I said, it will echo forever in time, and the events that surrounded it and the afterwards, it must have hit the residents of Nelson very hard. But the judge also said in his parting comments that until somebody comes forward to take the responsibility away from Clarence, Clarence would always be a prime suspect in this tragic case. It really is a sad, sad tale. Now that's all from Nelson Cemetery. We've been unable to locate poor Robert's final resting place. As you can see, it really is such a big place, and there's a lot of empty spaces, empty gaps between some headstones. So it's one of them again where unfortunately we've not been able to locate where he is buried. But if you did enjoy this story, don't forget to give us a big thumbs up. Don't forget to comment down below on this case. Have you heard the tragic tale of Robert Hockenhull? If so, comment down below. But in the meantime, guys, as I always say, take care, look after yourselves, and we will be back soon with other tales from a dark but at times glorious past. Stay safe, stay curious, everybody.